When my son screamed those words at me, "You're dead to me," something inside me went quiet. Not angry, not hurt, just still. Like a candle flame that flickers one last time before it goes out. It wasn't the first time he'd raised his voice at me, but it was the first time I realized I might actually have to let him go. My name is Martha, and I raised my son, Ethan, alone after my husband died when Ethan was 11. He used to follow me everywhere, grocery store, kitchen, even the garden. He'd say, "Mom, I'm gonna buy you a big house one day so you don't have to work so hard." I used to smile and tell him, "Just grow up to be kind. That's worth more than any house." For years, it was just the two of us. We didn't have much. I worked double shifts at the hospital cafeteria. Sometimes came home with leftover soup and bread, but our home was full of laughter. We'd watch old comedy shows on our little TV, share one blanket, and talk about the future. But the thing about raising a child alone is, sometimes love turns into dependence, and dependence into entitlement. I didn't see it happening at first. I just saw my son growing into a man, proud, ambitious, a little stubborn. I thought that was good. When he got his first job, I cried. When he bought his first car, I baked a cake. When he brought his girlfriend home, I welcomed her with open arms. Her name was Lila, soft-spoken, polite, the kind of woman who made you want to trust her. But soon I started to notice little changes. Ethan stopped calling me Mom. He started saying things like, "Martha, you don't need to worry about this. Martha will handle it." At first, I laughed it off. "Since when am I Martha to you?" I teased. He shrugged. "Since I'm an adult now. You said you wanted me to grow up." But his tone wasn't playful. It was dismissive, like he was reminding me my job was done, and I was no longer needed. Then came the house conversation. The small brick house where we'd lived for 27 years. The one I bought with my late husband, and paid off with every exhausted, aching shift. Ethan said, "Mom, the neighborhood's going down. You should sell before it loses more value. Move in with us." I smiled politely. "That's kind of you, but this house is home. I'm fine here." He pressed on. "You could live in the guest room. We'd look after you." But his eyes, and Lila's, told a different story. They weren't offering care. They were making a plan. From that day, little comments started to pile up like dust in corners. "You should really think about retirement, Mom. That old car's falling apart. Why don't you give it to us? You don't need all those savings sitting there doing nothing." I ignored it. Because I wanted peace. Because mothers always think, "He doesn't mean it like that." But deep down I knew. My son was learning the language of greed. And Lila was his teacher. The first real crack showed up one Sunday morning. I had cooked breakfast, pancakes, bacon, and coffee. They came over after church, all smiles. We sat down, but halfway through the meal, Ethan said, "Mom, have you thought about putting the house in my name? You know, in case something happens to you." I froze. The coffee spoon trembled in my hand. "Why would I do that?" I asked softly. He shrugged, chewing casually. "It's just practical. You're getting older, and—" Lila interrupted, her voice syrup-sweet. "It's not that we want anything, Martha. We just want to make sure things are simple for you." Simple for me. But what they meant was easy for them. That night, I sat by the kitchen window and looked at the framed picture of Ethan as a boy, missing front tooth, messy hair, holding up his first drawing of us. Me, Mom, and Dad in heaven. I whispered to that picture, "Where did you go, baby? What happened to my sweet boy?" The wind rattled the window pane. The silence answered for him. Weeks passed, and the tension thickened. Ethan would visit less. When he did, it was usually with a request, borrowing money, asking for help with bills, or subtly guilt-tripping me. When I said no, his expression hardened. He'd mutter, "After everything I've done for you," as if I owed him something. Once, when I refused to co-sign a loan for a business idea, he slammed his hand on my dining table. "You've never believed in me, have you?" he yelled. I looked at him, this grown man, my baby, and said quietly, when my son screamed those words at me, "You're dead to me." Something inside me went quiet. Not angry, not hurt, just still. Like a candle flame that flickers one last time before it goes out. It wasn't the first time he'd raised his voice at me, but it was the first time I realized I might actually have to let him go. My name is Martha, and I raised my son, Ethan, alone after my husband died when Ethan was 11. He used to follow me everywhere, grocery store, kitchen, even the garden. He'd say, "Mom, I'm gonna buy you a big house one day so you don't have to work so hard." I used to smile and tell him, "Just grow up to be kind. That's worth more than any house." For years, it was just the two of us. We didn't have much. I worked double shifts at the hospital cafeteria. Sometimes came home with leftover soup and bread, but our home was full of laughter. We'd watch old comedy shows on our little TV, share one blanket, and talk about the future. But the thing about raising a child alone is, sometimes love turns into dependence, and dependence into entitlement. I didn't see it happening at first. I just saw my son growing into a man, proud, ambitious, a little stubborn. I thought that was good. When he got his first job, I cried. When he bought his first car, I baked a cake. When he brought his girlfriend home, I welcomed her with open arms. Her name was Lila, soft-spoken, polite, the kind of woman who made you want to trust her. But soon I started to notice little changes. Ethan stopped calling me Mom. He started saying things like, "Martha, you don't need to worry about this. Martha will handle it." At first, I laughed it off. "Since when am I Martha to you?" I teased. He shrugged. "Since I'm an adult now. You said you wanted me to grow up." But his tone wasn't playful. It was dismissive, like he was reminding me my job was done, and I was no longer needed. Then came the house conversation. The small brick house where we'd lived for 27 years. The one I bought with my late husband, and paid off with every exhausted, aching shift. Ethan said, "Mom, the neighborhood's going down. You should sell before it loses more value. Move in with us." I smiled politely. "That's kind of you, but this house is home. I'm fine here." He pressed on. "You could live in the guest room. We'd look after you." But his eyes, and Lila's, told a different story. They weren't offering care. They were making a plan. From that day, little comments started to pile up like dust in corners. "You should really think about retirement, Mom. That old car's falling apart. Why don't you give it to us? You don't need all those savings sitting there doing nothing." I ignored it. Because I wanted peace. Because mothers always think, "He doesn't mean it like that." But deep down I knew. My son was learning the language of greed. And Lila was his teacher. "I'm sorry," I said softly. "I can't help you." His expression twisted. "You've got savings. You're just being cruel." I straightened my back. "No, son. I'm being fair. You told me I was dead to you. The dead can't write checks." He blinked, as if I'd slapped him with silence. He muttered something, maybe a curse, maybe a name, and stomped off. The car roared away. The marigold swayed gently, as if mocking the storm he left behind. After that day, the visits stopped. But news has a way of traveling, especially bad news. A month later, a neighbor's daughter mentioned seeing Ethan's name in a local Facebook post. His business had gone under. He'd borrowed from the wrong people. They'd lost their house. I didn't react. Just nodded politely, then closed the door. But that night, I sat at the kitchen table and stared at the teacup I'd glued back together weeks ago. No matter how neatly I'd mended it, the cracks still showed. That's what love was now, repaired but never the same. Then one evening as I was watering the plants, I heard footsteps on my porch. A faint knock. I opened the door and there he was again, but not the same man. His clothes were wrinkled, eyes red, beard grown in patches. He looked small. "Mom," he whispered. The word hit me like music I'd almost forgotten. I wanted to reach for him. But I didn't. "Not yet. What do you need, Ethan?" He swallowed. "A place to stay. Just for a bit." Lila left. I felt my throat tighten, but I stayed still. "Come in," I said quietly. He stepped inside, looking around as if seeing the house for the first time. The photos, the smell of home, the warmth. He sank into a chair and buried his face in his hands. "I messed up," he said. I thought I was doing the right thing." Lila said. I stopped him gently. "Son, don't give her all the blame. You made choices too." He nodded, tears spilling. I don't expect forgiveness. I just didn't know where else to go. I looked at him for a long time, then said, "You can stay in the guest room, but you'll work and you'll pay a small rent. And most of all, you'll learn how to respect the roof above you." He stared at me like he'd never heard me speak that firmly before. Rent. From my own mother. I smiled sadly. From your landlord. He didn't argue. He just nodded. Maybe from shame, maybe from exhaustion. Over the next few weeks, he tried. He mowed the lawn, fixed a leaky pipe, helped in the garden. But there was distance between us. The kind that only truth can cross. He'd sometimes sit at the table quietly while I made dinner. Once, I saw him looking at the same glued teacup. He said, "You fixed it." I nodded. Yes. But it's never quite the same. He looked down. I know. One Sunday he asked if he could come to church with me. I said yes. During the hymn, he stood beside me, hands trembling, lips barely moving. At the end he whispered, "I don't know if I believe in second chances anymore." I touched his hand and said, "That's okay. They don't always come easy." That night, as I was folding laundry, I saw a small envelope on my dresser. Inside was a note, his handwriting shaky. "Mom, I don't deserve your kindness. But I want to earn it. Thank you for letting me learn what dead really feels like, and for giving me life again." I sat there, tears falling onto the paper, because for the first time in a long time, my son's words sounded like his heart again. But the story wasn't done yet. Because life has a way of testing forgiveness, right when you think you've made peace. And that test was about to come knocking at my door again. It was early autumn when she came back. I remember because the air smelled of burnt leaves and cinnamon. That in-between season when the world decides whether to hold on or let go. I was in the kitchen kneading bread when I heard the knock. 3 light taps, cautious, familiar. When I opened the door, there she stood. Lila. Her hair was shorter now, bleached almost white, and her smile, that same calculated softness, hadn't aged a day. "Mrs. Turner," she said, her voice honeyed but thin. "It's been a while." I looked her up and down. Yes. Long enough for consequences to grow roots. She flinched, but then composed herself. "I just came to talk. About Ethan." I didn't invite her in. Instead, I leaned against the doorframe, my hands still dusted with flour. "Talk." She glanced around nervously before whispering, "He's been avoiding me. He changed his number. I think you've been poisoning him against me." I almost laughed, not out of humor but out of disbelief. "Lila, the only thing poisoning him was the dream you sold him." Her lips tightened. "You don't understand. We were building something. He just needed time." I sighed. "You took his time, his money, and his peace. What more did you want?" That's when her mask cracked. "I want him back," she snapped, her voice trembling. "He was mine before he was ever your son again." For a moment, I just looked at her. Really looked. The desperation behind her eyes, the vanity beneath the tremor in her hands. She wasn't evil. Just broken in a way that made her dangerous. "Go home, Lila," I said quietly. "Whatever home you still have." But as she turned to leave, she muttered, "You think he'll stay loyal to you forever? You'll see, Mrs. Turner. He'll turn again." Her words followed me like a cold wind as she walked away. That night, Ethan came home late, face tired, eyes distant. We sat across from each other at the dinner table, silent for a long while. Finally he said, "She found me." I nodded. I figured. "She wants me back. Says she's changed." His voice wavered. The same way it had when he was a boy caught between truth and temptation. I kept my tone steady. "And what do you think?" He hesitated. "I don't know. Part of me still loves her. But another part feels nothing." I looked at him gently. "Sometimes love dies quietly, Ethan. You don't even hear the last breath. You just wake up one day and realize the ache is gone." He stared down at his plate. "I don't know if I can trust myself." "Then trust time," I said softly. "It never lies." A week passed. He stayed busy, odd jobs, helping in town. But one evening, I noticed he'd dressed nicer than usual. Clean shirt, combed hair, the faint smell of cologne. My stomach sank. Going somewhere? I asked. He paused at the door. Just meeting an old friend. I didn't stop him. I just nodded. When he left, the house filled with that same heavy silence from months ago. I washed dishes slowly, one by one, whispering a prayer I wasn't sure I believed anymore. He didn't come home that night. By morning, I found myself pacing the porch, watching the road. The sun climbed high, then began to fall, and still no sign of him. Finally, around dusk, his car pulled up. He stepped out, eyes red, shoulders slumped. "I'm sorry," he said before I could ask anything. I waited. I saw her. She said she missed me. But then, he exhaled sharply. She only wanted money. She even cried, but I could tell it was an act. I felt embarrassed for believing her once. He sat on the porch steps, head in his hands. "She said you'd turn me against her. I told her she didn't need your help. She'd done that all by herself." I sat beside him, quiet. For the first time in years, he leaned his head on my shoulder. "Mom," he whispered, voice shaking, "I don't deserve you." I smiled faintly. "Maybe not. But grace isn't about deserving, son. It's about choosing peace over pride." He nodded, eyes glistening. "Then I'll spend the rest of my life trying to earn that peace." That night, as he slept in the guest room, I stood in the doorway watching him. The same way I used to when he was little, dreaming after a fever. Time had aged his face, but in that moment, I saw my boy again, fragile, flawed, but still mine. And I realized something I hadn't before. Sometimes love isn't a feeling. It's a quiet decision, made over and over, even when it hurts. The next morning, there was a knock at the door again, louder this time. When I opened it, 2 men in dark suits stood there. One of them asked, "Are you Mrs. Turner?" "Yes." They exchanged a look. "We're looking for Ethan Turner. We need to speak with him about an outstanding loan." I froze. Not again. He came out behind me, rubbing his eyes. The color drained from his face when he saw them. "Please," he said. "Give me a week. I'll make it right." One of the men looked skeptical. "You said that last month." My heart sank. So he had borrowed again, quietly, shamefully. After a tense exchange, they left with a warning. When the car disappeared down the road, I turned to Ethan. "Why, son?" He looked defeated. "I was trying to start over. A friend said he'd help me invest. I thought." I cut him off. "You thought you could fix it with shortcuts." Again. He lowered his head. "I didn't want to disappoint you." I sighed. "Disappointment doesn't come from failure, Ethan. It comes from hiding." For days, I barely spoke to him. He stayed quiet too, working odd shifts, eating little. I could see the guilt eating at him, the old patterns trying to pull him back under. But I also saw something different this time, a glimmer of humility, a willingness to face the wreckage instead of running. One evening, he came to me holding a small envelope, his paycheck. "Take it," he said. "It's for the rent. And the debt collectors, I've already called them. I'll pay what I owe." I looked at him, stunned. "You don't have to." "I do," he interrupted softly. "This time, I want to build something with my own hands. No shortcuts. No lies." I felt tears sting my eyes. Because in that moment, I saw the man I'd prayed he would become. Standing right there, tired but finally honest. That night, I wrote something in my journal. Some lessons can't be taught by love alone. Some must be taught by absence, by silence, by letting them feel the cold they created. And with that, a quiet peace settled over me. Not because everything was fixed, but because I finally knew I'd done enough. But the story doesn't end there. Because the real moment of forgiveness, the one that defines a mother's heart, came a few months later, when life tested us one final time. Winter came early that year. The mornings were quieter, frost on the window panes, the kettle whistling softly before dawn, and the smell of pine wood drifting from the old stove. Ethan had started working full-time at a construction site just outside town. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. Every evening, he came home with tired hands and dust on his boots. And for the first time in years, I saw a man learning dignity the hard way. Sometimes we'd sit at the table after dinner, sipping tea in comfortable silence. He'd tell me about the men at work, the ones who reminded him to keep his helmet on, the ones who teased him for being the quiet guy. I'd smile, listening to the tone of his voice, the way humility had softened it. One night, he said something that stopped me cold. "Mom, do you ever think about before? The things I said." I looked at him over the rim of my teacup. "Every mother remembers the words that broke her," I said softly. "But remembering doesn't mean holding on." He nodded slowly. "When I told you you were dead to me." His voice cracked. I meant it in anger. But I didn't realize it would echo like that. Every time I woke up alone, every time I failed, every time I wished I could call you. I reached across the table and placed my hand over his. "The thing about death," I said gently, "is that it teaches us to value what we thought was endless. You learned that, Ethan. That's enough." He didn't speak after that, just nodded, wiping his eyes. Spring returned, timid at first. Birds began nesting under the eaves again, and the little garden I'd abandoned the year before started to bloom on its own. One Saturday morning, I found Ethan outside, repairing the old fence his father had built decades ago. I watched from the window as he measured, sawed, and painted. Every stroke deliberate, careful, quiet. It reminded me of the years when he was just a boy, building birdhouses with his father under that same tree. For the first time since his father's death, I saw that boy again, not in his face, but in his effort. A few weeks later, something unexpected happened. Ethan called me from work, his voice trembling. "Mom," he said, "you should sit down." I felt my stomach tighten. "What is it?" "There was an accident. One of the guys, Tom, he got trapped under the scaffolding. I tried to pull him out before the beam fell." He paused, his breath uneven. "He's okay now. But they said if I hadn't been there, he wouldn't have made it." My hand flew to my mouth. "Oh, Ethan." He exhaled shakily. "They called me a hero. But I don't feel like one. I just did what was right." I smiled, tears spilling freely. "That's what heroes sound like, son." The next Sunday, the pastor at our local church asked him to speak briefly about that day. Ethan stood up in front of everyone, nervous, awkward, and told them about fear, mistakes, and second chances. When he finished, the room was silent. Then one by one, people began to clap, slow and gentle, like rain on the roof. I felt something deep inside me loosen, like an old knot finally giving way. For so long, I'd carried the weight of disappointment. But in that moment, it was replaced by something lighter, pride. That evening, after everyone had gone, Ethan came to my room. He handed me a small wooden box, smooth, hand-carved, with my initials etched on the lid. Inside was a letter neatly folded. He didn't say a word, just kissed my forehead and left me to read it. The letter was simple, but it broke me all over again, in the best way. "Mom, you were never dead to me. I was the one who stopped living. In pride, in greed, in blindness. You didn't abandon me. You showed me how it feels to lose the light I took for granted. I know I can't undo what I said, but I'll spend the rest of my life being the son you deserve. Thank you for not saving me too soon. Because losing you is what saved me. Ethan." By the time I finished reading, my tears had soaked through the paper. I closed the box, placed it on my nightstand, and whispered a prayer of gratitude, not just for my son's return, but for the journey that taught us both who we really were. Months passed. Ethan paid off his debt. He started volunteering on weekends, helping others who'd lost their way. He even began seeing someone, a quiet, kind nurse named Jamie who, unlike Lila, didn't need saving. When he introduced her to me, I watched how gently he spoke to her, how present he was. And I thought, this is what healing looks like. It's not grand. It's slow, quiet, steady, like frost melting from the window in the first light of spring. Now, when I sit on the porch in the evenings, I often hear laughter drifting from the kitchen. Ethan and Jamie cooking together, teasing each other about burnt onions or uneven pasta. And I smile, because the house that once echoed with silence now breathes again. Sometimes I still remember that night. The one when my son shouted that I was dead to him. But now when I remember it, it doesn't sting. It feels like looking at an old scar. A reminder of where love had to break in order to rebuild stronger. In the end, I learned something I wish every mother knew. Love doesn't mean rescuing them every time they fall. Sometimes it means stepping back, letting them crash, letting them bleed, letting them learn that the world won't hand them comfort. because only then will they understand the warmth you gave them, and how cold life is without it. The night he moved out to his own apartment, Ethan hugged me longer than he ever had. "Thank you, Mom," he whispered, "for showing me what dead to me really meant, and for bringing me back to life anyway." I smiled through tears. "Go live, son. That's all I ever wanted." And as his car disappeared down the road, the setting sun bathed the house in soft gold. It felt like closure, not an ending, but a quiet beginning. It's been 2 years since that day. Every Sunday, Ethan visits with Jamie, sometimes bringing flowers, sometimes just a loaf of bread we bake together like old times. We don't talk about the past anymore. We live in the space after forgiveness where love has been tested and survived. And sometimes when I sit in the quiet, I whisper to myself, he said I was dead to him. But maybe that was the moment we both started living honestly. Sometimes love means walking away not because you've stopped caring, but because you finally understand that real growth needs distance. When my son said I was dead to him, something in me broke, but maybe that's what had to happen. Because the mother I became after that pain was no longer afraid of letting go. We can't shield the people we love from the lessons they need to learn. All we can do is love them enough to let life be their teacher. And when they come back bruised, humbled, changed, we don't greet them with pride or punishment. We greet them with quiet grace. Because forgiveness doesn't erase what happened. It simply allows love to exist after it. Tell me, dear listener, if your own child ever turned away in anger, would you find the strength to love them again when they returned? Thank you for listening, and if this story touched your heart, don't forget to share it with someone who needs to hear it tonight. Until next time, take care of your heart, and may life always lead you back home.